you guys. It's so great to see you again. Before Chris got here, you had a good director. I was the executive director of the Community Action Association for 10 years prior to that time. And in 2020, I retired and went off over to Georgia. And so I do dabble back and forth. Occasionally I get back over here, I get a chance to see people. I was with y'all in November in Auburn. I appreciated that opportunity. But I am extremely pleased this morning to be with you. Take the opportunity to introduce to you, if you do not already know her, Sophia B. And when I was thinking about this, I've introduced many people at conferences all across the country, all over the years. There are plenty of responses you get when you ask for information. Tell me what I should say about you. I did that many years ago. I was introducing Catherine Tucker-Windman. Y'all know who Catherine was? She wrote the Jeffrey and 13 Ghosts, Lady from Selma, and became an nationally known storyteller. And I said something to her. I did not know her at that time. I sent her a note and I said, tell me what I can use in your introduction. Her response was, I'm just a storyteller. Now, I have another friend who's a dear friend today, and he's an academic. You have to be careful with academics. And I asked him to send me something to use for his introduction. He sent me 87 pages. So I didn't ask Sophia to send me anything today, because I think I know Sophia. I know her heart. I know how important she has been to people in this state for decades. I'll give you a couple of things about her. She has been praised and received accolades all over this country. Some of those are particularly significant, I wanted to point out to you. Sophia was the second Alabamian to be recognized by the MacArthur Foundation for the Genius Recipient. She is also a recipient of the Rockefeller Foundation's, my glasses back on, the Rockefeller Foundation's Public Service Award, and the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University's Weizmann Program for Leadership and Social Change. I really like the last one because no one has made social change to the extent that Sophia has, or devoted her entire life to that. I'm sorry I can't make the words of this. Sophia has an unparalleled dedication and commitment to people all across this country that are marginalized. She has a strong commitment for making change, for seeing where change is needed and taking the steps to make change. She has become over the years a very good friend of mine. We were working in the State House, I think it was the State House. We were working the legislature trying to make sure we got sufficient funding for programs that were important to poor people in the state, or either we're meeting with a member of the governor's cabinet, I'm not sure which. It's the first time I think Sophia referred to me as her favorite white man. So I take great pride in that over the years. When I've been with Sophia and other people are there, I think she's paying too much attention to sort of a white person. I'll go back and say, that's not preferable. Okay, I continue to be your favorite. Over the years, when I was working with you guys, when I was dealing with government on business, we frequently would have dinner together. And we would sit and go through hours of discussions, literally, talking about a little white boy growing up in rural Mississippi and a little black girl growing up in rural Alabama. And one of the things that I noted out there was, in spite of those vast differences, what was occurring in our states, in Alabama and Mississippi at that time, there were certain areas of commonality, just as like there were certain areas of great difference. But we would sit for hours and try to resolve all the problems that were there and try to articulate those problems and things that people should be doing. And at this time in our government's history, where there's so much diversity, so much animosity, and so much division, could you make changes that we recognize the needs of all people in our society? When I retired, I did not get to Montgomery for several years. So that was 3 months ago, I guess. I was going to be in Montgomery and I called Sophia and said, let's get together and catch up. I'll tell you one other story, I'll shut up when we talk to her. So we went to the restaurant that we always like to go to, and I made a reservation. When I got there, I didn't see Sophia, and I told the greeter there my name, and I had another guest joining me, and her response was, your wife's in the restroom, she'll be with you in just a moment. And I thought about that for a moment, and I thought, in spite of how frustrated we are at times, and see things that are so bad, you think everyone is at odds, that nothing good has happened. To me, that represented an old white guy and a mature black woman. And someone would think that we were married. But there was a time in our lives where not only was that against the law, but it was certainly my consternation. And so I smiled at her, looked at her for a moment, and I said, Sophia is not my wife, but when she gets here, if you ask her, she will tell you I am her favorite white man. If you will join me for a moment and welcome Sophia B.
Oh my God. Good morning.
Good morning.
Are you hearing me okay without my picking up the mic?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. Ron, you've gotten even with me for embarrassing you at that Alabama Child Care Alliance meeting when you came in late and I announced to folk that, oh, here comes my favorite white man. Well, y'all, it was on the heels of some things that Ron is good at doing and some other folks, but it happened to have translated into $28 million for early childhood education and those child care programs. So hey, you qualify real well. I am so delighted to be here with you this morning, and particularly honored that you have me as your start out speaker, for this occasion. So thank you very much. I kept looking at faces as I was coming in and hoping that I was going to see somebody that I remember, but I feel like you all are all kin to me because I have had a long history with community action in some form or in some way. But before I get into that, I do want to thank Mona Davis, who has traveled with me here. As you can see, I've had a few health issues, but hey, I'm still moving. And God and I talk all the time. And I said, God, help me to get this book finished, please. And in October of 2020, when I had it finished, I said things were real shaky for me. I said, but God, can we renegotiate the contract? Can I just be able to get out there and share it and tell it? And so far, hey, 2023, and I'm still doing it. So thank you. And I want to say hats off to Chris Rowe, who we met and talked about the conference, and he shared the idea of including this piece of work, which was my story, in your conference package, and that's indeed a super honor as well. So I hope I don't do a lot of repeats. Mona will call me out about going too much into the book. She said, let people read it, Sophia. But I asked her to at least give me a little bit of a 5 minutes heads up so I can know how to kind of bring things together and close it out a little bit, because I am known to be a talker. But my prayer this morning and last night was, please, Lord, let me say something or share something that will be uplifting and be a light. So that's my prayer, and I hope that I am able to honor that. Let me start by just sharing a few things about my history with Alabama's community action programs. In 1965, my sister and I, Deborah, were among the first 16 black students to integrate schools in Elmore County. And you'll learn more of those details in the reading of the memoir. In '66, in my business education class, I was assigned to the Coosa Elmore Community Action Program, and one of my scariest things was walking across Bill Grage Bridge to get to that program in this downtown city of Wetumpka. And the director of that program was Miss Elizabeth Edwards, who some of you may know. She was the wife of a doctor. 2 summers after that, I also was a part of the CETA program, which was in, Mail Moore, Coosa, whatever, and got to really refine my typing and my business skills, being a little helper in an office during that summer program, not to mention the few little dollars that came with it. That was a big thing in our family. And then I graduated and ended back in 1970 at Auburn University after being at Faulkner for a couple of years. And in my work-study program, I got to work for the Alabama Council on Human Relations as a credit counselor for families who were trying to obtain ownership of a 235 home. And what an experience that was under the leadership of our beloved Nancy Spears. Now, all of these experiences were great, but I will tell you about the one over in Elmore County when I was asked by Miss Edwards to go get her a lunch sandwich from Sam's Cafe. I went and I saw the line, and I followed the line at lunchtime, of course. There was a line, and I followed it up to the point where you put in your order. And that's when I was told, you need to go back outside and come around to the window. That was my first time experiencing something that Black people experienced all the time in our segregated society. That you had to go outside and come to the window, but you couldn't stand in line where everybody else was taking their order. Now, that wasn't particularly as painful as it was. I'd already endured quite a few other things. So I graduated from Auburn University in Family and Child Development and found myself in a meeting in Selma, Alabama, similar to this in a Tabernacle Baptist church, but there were lots of people there, and they were Black teachers who had been displaced out of the, integration of schools. There were some people with churches. There were grandmamas and mothers, and all of them were in somewhat a distress over the fact that in this period of Brown versus Board and the integration of schools, Alabama had passed a law called the Child Care Act of 1971. And I'm sure if you have been involved anyways with early childhood education, you have some familiarity with that law that basically says with more than 6 children, you had to be licensed by the state, and even if you were in a home, you had to have a home license to care for children that you were receiving any income from. And the concern of that group of people was, what's going to happen to our children because we can't get licensed? Well, anyway, I got an internship from the Southern Education Foundation, and my job was to organize these people into an organization which was called the Federation of Community-Controlled Child Care Centers of Alabama. We dropped the community control about 10 years later, but it was focal, which we were known for. And focal was kind of on the heels of the War on Poverty programs. You may recall that if you have been with community action for any period of time, In many ways, these programs were viewed with skepticism because it was tied directly to civil rights. And it was about a black organization in some ways. Folks saw it as a black organization because poor whites did not feel comfortable being associated with being poor. And so services to them in many instances were somewhat scarce. Now, talking about poor, I grew up in a family of 10, and my dad had a 3rd grade education, and my mom had 11th grade education. And we often laughed later on that we were so poor, we were too poor to have 2 O's in the poor. We just poor. And we knew about how that was long before we ended up, after our home was firebombed, and 10 of us lived in a 2-room hay shack with no windows for 15 months because a kind man allowed my daddy to bring his family in from all the little places that we were spread out to in our neighborhood and in our community after we lost our home. By the way, the day before my sister was to return to school after being expelled for over 4 months. And the Justice Department had to get involved in her getting back in school because of a fight with a white boy. I think the thing that I want to share a little bit, because I know you all are familiar with what it's like growing up in these situations and being in these situations of poverty. But I tell you, whatever I had experienced, getting in that little Volkswagen and going across this state in communities, in rural communities, talking to people who by the way, who had not been able to vote any more than about a couple of 3 years before this is going on. But getting out there and sitting at the table talking to them and talking about their desire for their children, what they wanted. For the first time, there was some jobs coming to Alabama, factory jobs and so forth. So before, their mamas and things could only work in the fields and work as maids, and they had opportunities, so they needed childcare. And that was just not black women, that was women in general. But to have these folks say, the health department came out and said we needed this, the fire department came out and said we needed that, DPS said we needed this, and then as soon as we went and fundraised and got the money to do it, and thought we were going to get the license to start to serve the families, then they came back and said, oh, and you need to do this, and you need to do that. That was what was the norm, and people were so frustrated because they didn't know when they were going to get a license, and they didn't know when they were going to be able to serve the families that they were needing to serve. And this organization then realized there was more work to be done. And part of that work was not just getting those children in the child care programs. The license was important. It was helping them to learn how to be businesswomen, business owners of their facilities, paying the state taxes, sending in your reports to your city, doing the things to run a business. People were scared. People did not know how to meet the requirements, but they wanted to meet the requirements. They wondered why certain things were happening to them. And it was amazing when we talked to them about voting. People were scared to vote. They said, I don't want to lose my stamps. I don't want to lose my at that time, it wasn't called TANA, my AFDC, my welfare. Y'all remember? I saw something called recently a movie, around the Nevada welfare rights campaign, which reminded me, storming Caesar's Palace reminded me when I was out there of how the inspectors from DHR would send people out in the middle of the night to check to see if a man was in the house and look up under the things for their shoes or whatever and so forth. It had such an indignity to it in terms of that kind of service. But we also help people to recognize for things to change in your community, you are going to have to know who the people are that are policymakers. And people were scared, but we helped them to figure out. And at times we would have, like this session, a letter writing campaign so that they understood what they could put in a letter, and we would learn that we needed to have the envelopes left there where we put the stamps on them, because those letters didn't get mailed when they took them with them. Again, because folk were nervous. The reason I share this, because I love your theme, making a difference. Making a difference in Alabama, empowering communities to eliminate poverty in this state. The work that you do is so important. It is so important. But one of the things in my experience and the experience of our organization is that people have to have a sense of vision of what it is they want for their lives. And they can't get that through a flyer, an email alert, or whatever. You've got to help people figure out. And I have had people to confront me and say, you are talking about this blank, and I can't pay my water bill, and my gas bill is due next Tuesday. And you're talking about a vision in 5 years? I tell this because I believe we must, to eradicate poverty, it's twofold. It's having resources that are tangible, but it's also to try to connect with the mental internalization of oppression. When people have been treated to go outside the door, don't come in here and talk to me, do this, do that, there is an internalized, just as children, that I am not good enough, I am stupid, I'm not intelligent enough. And where does that get passed on? To their children. So in breaking that cycle, we recognized that we had to really try to hear. And we became, the focal staffers became our model. We started to do the very thing in our office that we were going outside to do in the communities we were there. How we talk to each other, how we share with each other, how we related to each other, and what is your vision, by the way? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do in life? What skills do you want to possess? What qualities about you that you would like to change from where you are right now to where you are here? That was the practice that we did. And this practice and this work translated into something called, and I had a copy, and I wished I had more copies of this. You'll hear more of the details of it as you read the book, but it's Communities Act to Create Hope. Communities Act to Create Hope. And folk, it's when hope is created, when people feel valued, that they have something to contribute. And I agree, they've got to start with themselves. When we would ask parents, what is your vision for your children? Nobody ever asked me that before. Well, what is it? I just want them to have a better life. Okay, what does that look like? I don't want them to have to work so hard like I did and just not earn anything. So what is it that you want them to have? Well, I want them to get an education. What do you think you need to do to participate in that? Well, I know I need to read, but I can't read too good. I know I need to play with them. They told me that I need to play with my children. But Lord, I'd be so tired, and I tell you, this diabetes is just getting me. But do you understand, in the process of going through this with folk, we had some folk decided that they wanted to go back and get their GED. We had some folks that said, we would like to organize a fitness program at the child care program so we can do a little bit more exercise. People began to think about how they could be a resource to achieving the things that they wanted for their families, they wanted for their children, and they wanted for themselves. And this was not easy, because when we were doing this process, the 45 years that I was at FOCO as its leader, we never accepted the state and federal dollars, and we had to go out there and fundraise. And you know why? Because when we needed to go down there to the State House, y'all, and shut down the switchboard with all those calls coming in from parents and community people, the chair of finance and appropriations finance says, if y'all don't open up these phones, we are going to kill this bill. And it was our bill mandating child care, because they were going to shut down child care in the coming session of the budget session. I know where your dollars come from, and I'm not asking you to cut your neck off. What I am saying here, there are times that we will have to use courage, just as we ask our children to when they are learning something they don't know how to do. Folks, in this environment that we are operating in, we must have the courage to step outside of our comfort zone and really do some things that may not be so popular if we want to move to the goal of eradicating poverty in Alabama. I will share a few more points, and then I will close. Small acts of kindness. Small acts of kindness does not require resources. The bus driver, when he pulled up to the principal and said, this girl said her sister is not on the bus, and he said, what's her name? And he said, Deborah Bracy. The principal said, that nigger gal is in jail where she's gonna be for hitting a white boy. And the bus went into a roar of cheer like it was a touchdown. I pleaded with this white driver, please let me off, sir, across town. I knew my mama and dad didn't have a telephone, but our pastor was one of the co-owners of the funeral home there in Wetumpka, and I knew I could get to a phone so he could call my Uncle Charlie, who had a phone, to let them know my sister was missing. He said no. And then I started to cry, because I knew it was going to take us 2 hours to get to home on the bus, and it was going to be dark. And I knew that people had come up missing for less than hitting a white boy. I was scared. But that bus driver pulled just as he got toward the funeral home. He sped up and then abruptly stopped and said, "Get off, get off." Because it was against the rules for him to let me off the bus after I had gotten on the bus there in town. To this day, I count that as one of the kindest acts that's ever been rendered to me. A bus driver. On several other occasions, we had to sit at the front of the bus for our safety, but also so we could be targets for everything that got thrown from the back of the bus. And oftentimes he would just turn around. One of those times was when M.L. King had been assassinated. And the whole bus was cheering and celebrating. "Oh, I'm so sad. I'm so sad. What you sad about, Bobby? Somebody beat me to killing Martin Luther King." And he could see the tears starting to well up and looked to his right and said, "Don't let them see you cry. Don't let them know they're getting next to you." I tried calling that bus driver many times after I'm an adult, but of course I could not get through to him until 10 years ago when I used a fake name and his wife let me talk to him. I shared with him what his kindness had done to me as a person, what it had given me hope that all white people were not evil. There was a good white person somewhere in the world. He cried and said I had made his week. He wanted to know the name. He named all 8 of the other black students. This had been 30 years. Where were they? What are they doing? And so forth. And when I discovered, as I was getting my book published and looking for names and so forth, I discovered that he died in May 15th, 2021. And he was a 2-time Purple Heart recipient from World War II. Never knew that. But here was a man who risked and put himself out going against the norm. The act of kindness of these community action servants coming from Atlanta, checking on my family to see that we had food, even as we lived in a shack, trying to help us get applications, my dad and mom get applications to try to rebuild the home, and so forth. And one of the amazing things that I discovered as I was doing research for my book, my sister and I traveled to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to the archives of the American Friends Service Committee, where the Quaker groups were coming from. And all they asked for that $50 that my family got, what was the only income we had to live on, was uprooted, was for my mother to send a report of what had happened to the family. I looked at those records and it was pristine. I almost felt like I could smell the smell of when those letters were written. They were kept so well. And but I also read things, and what I discovered was things that those workers, those service providers, asked my parents to do. Make contact with this person, make contact with that person. I saw in the files that they had already made contact with the folk before my parents even made it. But what they were doing was encouraging my parents to build relationships with people that were resource people that they were going to need. That was, it struck me as how insightful it is to not just give a hand, but to help people to also receive that from their own hands. And that was one of the things that stuck with me in terms of service. I think that this morning I was reflecting, And I want you all to pray for my great niece, because again, I learned last night that she, as so many of our young people right now, are feeling left out and alone and abandoned and wants to end it. And it disturbs me, it hurts me, because we managed to survive the pandemic. We just drive like crazy on the highways. But these young people, they're trying to figure out how to be in this new climate. And for many of them, they are taking their lives, and we have got to find a way. In this book that I picked up, the concepts that I wanted to share today, it was one that came out of a More Taught Than Taught publication that we produced as we struggle to figure out how to bring this to community organizing. This was the second publication, called Communities Act to Create Hope, in 2010. The focal organization is now the Institute for Social Justice. But I want to share with you all that in this publication, which is more of a tool of how to build relationships with communities and so forth, we were fortunate to have people who were interested in other parts of the world to put this in place in their communities. Australia, London, it was Jackson, Mississippi. We had about 4 locations where this was shared. I will just take a little excerpt from what this is as I bring my conversation here to a close. In looking at poverty, I went like everybody else go. I went to Google. and and the World Bank's definition of poverty concludes with, poverty is a call to action for the poor and the wealthy alike. A call to change the world so that many more may have enough to eat, adequate shelter, access to education and health, protection from violence, and a voice in what happens in their community. Folk, if we're trying to fix people without reaching out for their voice and trying to bring them in the table, even though it takes longer, I'm not so sure we're going to be successful. Last week at a church meeting that got a little bit contentious, I went back to my file and pulled out something that came out of here that I had brought to my church, distinguished church body, in 2011. It was what we created in our office space with our staff to practice what we were taking out in the field. Creating a contract of how we be together. We didn't try to get the English proper, how we be together. And I shared this last week and reminded my parishioners. The principles are: listen well, seek to value and hear another's ideas, be respectful, avoid side conversations when someone is speaking, share airtime, and I'm trying to rush so I can do that, avoid dominating the discussion, agree to disagree. Different opinions can be shared without attacking blaming or shaming. Seek win-win solutions. Cooperation versus competition. Meaning avoid right, wrong. I'm right and you're wrong. Good, bad, black, white. Thinking when consensus is needed. What I'm saying to you all, what our world, what our country, what our state, what our organizations and our families need is to figure out how do we be with each other in a way that respects this human being. I'm a human being. We're both human. And how are we going to be together to make the change that needs to be changed for the betterment of each of us and all of us? What a wonderful opportunity you all have for these next 3-4 days of being together. It's a powerful move to begin to move the bar to end poverty in Alabama. But it starts with each of us in this room to make that change. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yes.